You watched President Trump speak, Ken. Is there a single word you might use to characterize his remarks?
I'm not good at these sort of like guess-a-word games.
Well, that's precisely why
Let me tell you what will be maybe out of sync with many other people's views.
Oh.
All right?
Okay.
He gave a speech where he unquestionably made it clear that the United States wants to see Europe economically prosper. And I think that was a really important message to be delivered, and I hope the Europeans heard it. Because over the course of the last 12 months, there's been a tremendous amount of friction between our two continents, and we are long-standing allies. But at the end of the day, the United States wants to see Europe prosper. And for the free world to prosper, Europe must grow faster.
Is the way to get Europe to prosper, to get Europe to grow faster, to get Europe to be more competitive, is the right way to do that to troll European leaders, to taunt Emmanuel Macron on stage? Is that the right way to inspire the desired response?
I think Trump likes to troll people of all backgrounds. It's not limited to just leaders.
And will people of all backgrounds respond in the way that we or he might like them to as a result?
No, of course not. But it's just part of his shtick.
It's just who he is.
It's who he is. You know, I have on my wall a copy of a tweet that he put out about me, and I've been trolled. It's okay. Like, life goes on. Badge of honor.
Besides the point he made about wanting Europe to be more competitive, which you clearly agree with, did you find yourself agreeing with the balance of everything else he said?
So let me be very clear. I think the president has an extraordinary instinct for the problems that both the United States and the free world faces. I often don't agree with his solutions, but I admire his ability and his willingness to forcefully talk about the problems that we face both in the United States and in the free world.
His diagnostic acumen
is really top-notch.
Well, so...
I mean, like, take a step back, okay? Mm-hmm. The United States supported WTO, free trade, NATO, and a whole variety of other global institutions from World War II onward to accelerate the economic growth of Europe post the war. Because we believed that the strongest way to defend the free world, again, was for Europe to be prosperous. Now, over the course of that journey, we didn't update the terms of that deal. And the American worker, in many respects, got the short end of the stick around the world. He just did.
True. I mean, I think we can all agree that it wasn't just because of a lack of competitiveness, investment, burden sharing on the part of the Europeans. There were many American companies that went to China and gladly gave away their IP. That cost American jobs, too.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so this, again, is where the president's done a good job and said, do you know what? We need fair trade for the United States. We need a world hierarchy in which the American worker and American businesses have a fair and level playing field around the world. And often that wasn't the case when he was president. And he's really trying to address it. I wouldn't use tariffs as my mechanism of action to do so. But I have to give him credit. He is fighting for the American worker and the American people.
Okay. So his motives, in your opinion, are
constructive.
The right ones, constructive. Let's take it up to 10,000 feet. One of the reasons that this room is so full, Ken, is because you have a quality that distinguishes you, somewhat obviously, from many other business leaders, and that is your willingness to speak out, to champion what you believe is right, and to challenge what you believe is wrong. And we saw you do that with the Biden administration. You were a vocal critic. You took issues publicly with his policies and the posture of his administration. But you're fair about it. As you put it once upon a time, country before party. You've done it to President Trump as well. In April, some of you may recall, not long after Liberation Day, you criticized President Trump for moving too fast alienating allies, making Americans poorer, and tarnishing the sterling reputation of U.S. assets. So here we are, right? For those who aren't counting, this is the second day of the second year of Trump's second presidency. What do you think now? This is the 10,000-foot view. Is he doing what's right for America? Not just diagnosing the problem. Policies and execution are just as important.
So let's be clear. He was elected into office because of two really material problems. Number one is our southern border was utter chaos. Millions of people streamed into our country from all kinds of backgrounds, some of which, frankly, backgrounds we wouldn't want, but they streamed into the United States illegally. That's what it is. It was illegal mass immigration. And the president secured the border. I mean, he brought that to an absolute halt. And I really hope that he makes it clear that the United States still embraces legal immigration. I think we need to reiterate that point quite a bit, because one of the great superpowers of America is that we've attracted so many brilliant people from around the world, but the chaos at the southern border, he ended. Big policy triumph. The second issue that he was elected around was that of inflation. The Biden administration, we had rampant inflation in the United States, a combination of fiscal stimulus that was just beyond the appropriate levels, and monetary policy that was slow to react to the fiscal stimulus that was occurring. We had a level of untenable inflation in the United States of America. And if you were a retiree and your savings were in fixed income assets, you were seeing your future dim every single day. And you had enough. And the president is really trying to grapple with the issue of inflation. You know, it's quite ironic to see the Democrats have changed the language to affordability to try to attack President Trump for the rise in prices that largely occurred under the Biden administration. But the president right now, I think, really does have the message that he has to address the high cost of living in the United States. How do we make sure that for the American retiree or the American worker, that every dollar they have goes further and their quality of life improves?
I might come back to immigration, but specifically on the point of inflation, you have said that, in fact, to a colleague of mine not long ago, Danny Berger, that Republicans are finding it hard to accept the reality that many of the policies that they've championed, including driving illegal immigrants out of the country, are, by their very nature, inflationary.
And that's exactly right. So here's where he has a much more difficult dance. Shutting down the flow of illegal immigrants and pushing people out of our country constricts our labor markets. It's classic economics. If you reduce supply, all else being equal, prices rise. And we've had real wage growth in a number of sectors of the economy where the illegal immigrants play a very critical role in performing difficult jobs that need to get done.
And tariffs are also playing a role.
Tariffs, you know, if we look at the most recent data, the vast majority of the tariffs, the tax of tariffs, is being borne by either the American worker or the American citizen at the cash register, or by corporate America reducing their profit margins. And the president did reduce tariffs on a number of goods that are in the day-to-day shopping basket of the American people. So he understands he has to address some of the negative implications of tariffs to help address the issue of affordability.
Yes, he understands. He understands that affordability is a real issue and that it's political kryptonite in the midterms, but immigration and tariffs are big levers, hard, to counteract. Not to get too weedy here, but is he taking, in your mind, the right approach with recent initiatives such as banning institutional investors from buying single-family homes, intervening in the mortgage bond market, seeking an interest rate cap for credit cards at 10%, allowing home buyers to dip into their retirement savings? I can see why some of those measures might be welcome to American people. Is that really going to change the affordability outlook?
So I think this is where I might disagree with the president. The great power of the American economy is our embracing of capitalism. And when we unleash our entrepreneurs, when we unleash competition, we are able to materially improve our quality of living. And the real issue in the housing market is the lack of supply. And why do we have a lack of supply? Permitting in much of the country takes months or years to get a permit to build a house. I mean, how absurd. And then the building code has become so unwieldy and so overreaching that the cost to build a house puts it out of the reach of the average family trying to buy their first home, the home in which they'll have their dreams made. So the real issue is we need to address the regulatory burdens on the housing market. And if I were the president, I would have used Fannie and Freddie to do that. I would have said, if you are in a county that does not have prompt permitting and that does not have a reasonable building code, we will either drop the mortgage caps or we simply won't write mortgages in that county after a date certain, to get our politicians at the local level to move their feet and to address the chronic problem that we have in America. We have too few of houses.
I do think it's really important for people
to
know that you're willing to say that. Yes,
the difference here?
I do.
Let the American entrepreneur get to work, and with competition and with the burden of government off their backs, they can solve the problems that we face in day-to-day life. You know what?
I mean, at least I have to give you credit for being consistent. This has been your rallying cry for the better part of 15 years, if not longer, economic freedom.
Well, I mean, maybe it's because I view what we do at Citadel as part of that story of unleashing entrepreneurs. You know, if you look at the U.S. equity market, for example, it's one of the most efficient markets in the world. And it's been driven by incredibly competitive dynamics between us and a handful of firms that have radically dropped the cost of trading for all over the course of the last 2 decades.
So since we're talking about the American economy, for the moment, we will change our focus shortly. Let me ask you, because you said on those particular issues, you take issue with some of the things he's doing. It would be great if we had more housing supply.
Or credit cards. How do we increase competition?
Right.
Like, what is it that gives a Wells Fargo or a JP Morgan or a Capital One such incredible commercial advantages that it forecloses in a material way new entry? And are there steps that we can take that are equitable that will increase competition amongst credit card issuers, that will bring down rates for all consumers on using their credit card? The worst thing we can do, if you regulate the maximum interest rate that you can charge, you actually reduce the stock of credit in society, particularly to younger people who have poor credit scores or to people who've had difficult times in life. And the younger people with poor credit scores in particular, those are people that literally start their business with their Visa card.
I want to go back
to take those entrepreneurs out of the economy, you really meaningfully reduce new firm creation, new job growth, and the innovation that makes America so special.
I would like to go back to the question I asked about whether the president is doing what's right for America. And you initially responded to me by saying he did what he said he was going to do, he tackled illegal immigration, and he's doing something about tackling inflation. That's still a work in progress, obviously. There are a number of other policies and positions that have a bearing on U.S. economic growth and U.S. economic competitiveness, particularly in the global arena. And I'd just like to understand, get a sense from you, channeling, I think, the interest here in the audience about whether you agree or disagree with where he is on the following. And you can do whatever you like, thumbs up, thumbs down. You can say agree, disagree. You can give me a little bit more, nuance. But redefining the focus of U.S. national security to the Western Hemisphere and seemingly opening the door for Presidents Xi and President Putin to operate with similar impunity in their own backyards. Good, bad?
So that's, I hope that's not the end game of our policy. Securing the national defense of the United States is of the utmost importance.
Always has been.
Always has been. And he's very focused on strengthening our military. And one of the things I really love is how he compliments the military every chance he gets. You look at what happened in Venezuela. He is effusive in his praise of a mission that was flawlessly executed. It's really good to see him bringing pride back to our country for the men and women who serve our nation. So again, it's like one of these mixed bags. I love the fact that he stands for a strong military, a strong national defense, and frankly, in America that no longer hides in its own shadow. I think he might be right. There's a good chance if he had been president, we would not have a war in the Ukraine.
Well, hard to know and prove.
Hard to know and prove, but hard to argue the counterfactual.
But at the same time, he's cutting aid and support for Ukraine. Do you approve or disapprove of that?
So with the Ukraine, he is really trying to figure out, like, how do I bring Russia and Ukraine to the table? And you could see his frustration
clearly
that Putin is an immovable object on this front. In some sense, they're both very strong men. They feel very convicted in their opinions. They don't like to bend. And this has been, I think, for the president, one of the harder battles he's had to fight is how do you create room for peace in the Ukraine?
You're a strong believer, Ken, that immigration, legal immigration, is the engine of innovation in America. Look at all the foreign-born Americans who are running some of the world's greatest companies, including Peng, for example, at Citadel Securities.
A huge portion of Citadel's leadership team was born outside the United States.
So curtailing legal immigration, restrictions on H-1Bs, halting processing of visa applications from 75 countries, is that the right way to promote the right kind of immigration?
So I know as a factual matter, within the White House, there's a real debate. How do we make sure that we continue to bring to our country the incredible number of people who have come to America, who have built and run our great businesses? You pointed out, half the Silicon Valley is run by immigrants or children of immigrants. At Citadel, my partner who runs Citadel Securities was born and raised in mainland China. In the hedge fund, my partner, co-CIO, was born in Ecuador. Head of my commodities business was born in Australia. I place a huge value on being able to bring the best and brightest from around the world to work at our team at Citadel. The president is really grappling with how do we make sure that that door stays open in the United States of America?
Well, why shut it in the process?
Because there was this whole moment that it was immigration that we were ending, and there was not the distinct focus on the chaotic part and the highly value-added part to our economy.
So the longer this persists, the worse it is for America?
No, I think the longer this persists, the more they'll get that gradient better thought through.
And one last thing before we shift our focus.
So you mentioned that I'm willing to speak my mind about the president's policies. And let me say why. Because he listens. And I think that American business executives are making a real mistake in not speaking their mind. Because this president, he'll have his moments where he'll troll, or he'll have those moments, but he does listen.
Well, there are consequences to speaking out. It would seem I can kind of understand. I would love to see more business leaders speak out. It would be, frankly, good for the news industry. But Jamie Dimon says something on the JP Morgan conference call about the president's demand that banks cap credit card interest rates at 10%. And the next day or the day after, all of a sudden, we're reading about the Justice Department investigating debanking by JP Morgan. Are they not related?
Actually, I think that investigation was probably open long prior to that conference call.
Well, maybe the public's knowledge of said investigation was conveniently timed.
Perhaps.
So what is it going to take then for more business leaders to speak out? Why aren't they speaking out? What are they afraid of?
So first of all, behind closed doors, they're much more willing to engage.
Sure, I have those conversations too.
And so the question is they might ask themselves, to what end? They might just ask that question. From my vantage point, I hope that when I talk about American policies, that people that I work with in the House and Senate have a chance to understand my point of view. Been involved deeply in the American political process for 20 years, and I have a number of friends in the House and in the Senate. I want them to have a chance to be informed about my thoughts on our policies. So I think American executives really should not be afraid to use their voice with this administration. The first administration in a long time, Trump 1, Trump 2, that has clearly put the interests of the American business community first. I mean, I can't tell you, you didn't touch on this, but the regulatory deluge under Biden.
Well, I didn't touch on it because we have covered it extensively in past conversations.
Was suffocating. Suffocating.
Oh, I know, and I know you're.
And it is such a relief in the United States these days to be able to go back to business.
Let's shift our focus to Europe for a moment. It's important for me to ask this question, Ken, because you have been clear in the past that you believe in the value of alliances and in having allies. So we'd like to know what you make of the president's insistence that America buy Greenland and the corollary, right? The implicit threat to NATO if Denmark denies him. He said it today. All we want is a piece of ice. You can say yes and we'll be grateful. You can say no and we'll remember. Does that justify an invasion of Greenland, which he has talked about?
He was very clear today. We will not use force to take Greenland.
So where does this end then? Retaliatory tariffs? He jacks up tariffs on these 8 countries to 25%. The Europeans invoke the anti-coercion measures, and it's a global trade war?
I don't think we're heading towards a trade war with Greenland. But I do think the president today made an interesting case, almost compelling, as to what the U.S.'s interest is in Greenland.
Well, national security, international security. He sort of dismissed the whole critical minerals issue, the Golden Dome.
Right, that Golden Dome is what,
Sure, but
Israel's version of that allows Israel to exist as a country. If our enemies do not think they can take us on a first strike, they will not try to take us at all.
do you really think that the Europeans, the Danes, the Greenlanders don't want the United States to put the kinds of defense systems in place in Greenland that would protect them equally as it protects us in North America?
So you and I sit here and scratch our heads and wonder why this is such an issue. And I think that's like a really interesting question. Like, why do we, why does the president
They would probably be willing to commit to it in writing.
Well, actually, the U.S. already has pretty substantial rights to access Greenland for defense. And as the president said, the United States has shed a lot of blood and spent a lot of money over the decades to ensure peace here in Europe and in North America.
How do you think this ends?
I think there's a significant probability that this moves from page A1 to page C17 over the course of the next 6 to 9 months.
An off-ramp. There's an off-ramp coming?
The question is, does this stay front and center in his mind versus all the other issues he grapples with?
That is the key question. I'm afraid I can't answer it. A couple of quick things before we run out of time. 2 days ago, Ken, we witnessed a disorderly, seemingly uncontrollable sell-off in the Japanese bond market. And there are many people here who may not be paying close attention to the Japanese bond market. Pay attention, right? It has been described as eerily similar to the UK's 2022 gilt crisis. Is there an implicit warning, Ken, in that sell-off for the U.S. Treasury bond market?
Actually, there's an explicit warning that if your fiscal house is not in order, the bond vigilantes can come out and extract their price. And what's particularly troubling is that if you look at what happened in Japan, when bonds and stocks move together in prices, then bonds are no longer a hedge for your equity portfolio. And they lose a substantial part of what makes them so special in constructing a portfolio. If U.S. Treasuries are viewed as being at risk because the United States is not seen as being creditworthy, then bonds and stocks will move together in price, and that will result in bonds having a much higher demanded yield in the marketplace. So mortgage interest rates will be higher. The cost for us to finance our deficits will be higher. I think that what happened in Japan is a very important message to the House and to the Senate. You need to get our fiscal house in order.
Liz Truss was playing with fire. The Japanese just learned they're playing with fire. Is the United States, is President Trump playing with fire?
Probably not yet. The U.S. has so much wealth, we can maintain this level of deficit spending for some period of time. But the longer we wait to change direction, the more draconian the consequences will be of that change.
Last question for you, Ken. You've described the risk management process at Citadel as, and this is an oversimplification, looking at historical scenarios and running stress tests to understand how they or similar events would affect your firm's positions and its portfolios. I'd like to know, are you running more or perhaps different kinds of stress tests now in light of, say, the possibility of a failed auction in the Treasury market, or recent geopolitical developments, or perhaps these incipient signs of social instability and civil unrest in parts of America?
I mean, what was the last one?
Well, look what's going on in Minnesota. I said incipient signs.
Yeah, it doesn't help. It doesn't help to turn every small issue into a bigger issue than it is.
I was trying to be nuanced.
Yes,
Maybe I chose the wrong modifier.
I'm going to be nuanced back. It paints a picture of a country that's tearing itself apart.
That's not happening.
I mean, I live in the free state of Florida. The streets are safe. The schools are great. People are happy. There is none of the turmoil that you see in Minnesota and Florida. Zero. And by the way, we have a bipartisan government in Florida. The mayor of Miami is a Democrat. The mayor of the county is a Democrat. The governor of the state's a Republican. So back to the issue of risk management at Citadel.
And stress tests.
And stress tests. I mean, of course, I have to give real consideration to the geopolitical dynamics that are playing out in terms of how we construct our portfolio. And it has real implications on our willingness to invest in countries around the world. As an American headquartered firm, we would, for example, think about our investment exposure to China different than if, for example, we were based in the UAE or Saudi Arabia.
Of course.
That's a consequence of where we are today geopolitically that we need to keep in mind in how we run our affairs and manage our business. And then, of course, we need to think about today, what are the implications of a bond market that can have a move of the violent nature that we saw in the UK in 2022?
And Japan 2 days ago.
And Japan 2 days ago. And neither of those incidents is receiving the coverage they deserve in the mainstream media in the United States of America. The American voters need to understand we may not be playing with fire, but we have turned the fireplace on.